From Carnegie, China, this is China in the World. Engaging leading scholars and former policymakers on China's foreign policy and evolving global role. Brought to you by the East Asia-based Center of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Welcome to this season of Carnegie China's China in the World podcast, where we will be exploring how states in East Asia manage their multifaceted security and economic concerns as they engage with the People's Republic of China. My name is Ian Chong. I'm a non-resident scholar with Carnegie China and an associate professor of political science at the National University of Singapore. With me on this episode on Malaysia are Dr. Khoo Ying Hooi, who is an associate professor of international relations at Universiti Malaya. Her research expertise is in human rights, democratization, and civil society in Southeast Asia. She engages in regional and international collaborations that connect academic research with policy and advocacy. Shahriman Lockman is Director of Special Projects with the Institute of Strategic and International Studies in Malaysia. Shahriman's research includes Malaysian foreign and defense policies, Southeast Asian maritime security affairs, and Malaysia-China relations.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ian.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ian.
Let's get started. Let's begin with the big picture. How would you describe Malaysia's economic relationship with the People's Republic of China? We've seen that successive governments have sought Beijing's assistance in developing key infrastructure, and they've looked at the PRC as a major export market. How would you sort of characterize that relationship?
So, the economic relationship with China really looms large. It's very obvious wherever you go in Malaysia. It's right there. It's in your face, basically. You drive outside of Kuala Lumpur, you drive up to a big solar factory that wasn't there, just 6 months ago, all of a sudden. And you drive further down south of Kuala Lumpur 2 hours, and suddenly you see this port project by the Chinese, in Kuala Lumpur, in Negeri Sembilan, just 2 hours down south. It's really out there, and it's seen as a general positive thing. It is seen as a contributor to our vibrancy.
Well, I can certainly say that the Malaysia's economic engagement with China is really huge, as I think what Shahriman has basically described. If you come to Kuala Lumpur, basically you can see the significant presence of Chinese, as in shops, restaurants, and many others as well. So I think what's fascinating is also to see this sort of asymmetric interdependence that happens between Malaysia and China, whereby you see Malaysia kind of relies more on the relationship than China rely on us, although both also benefit from this sort of exchange. And I think China is also one of the Malaysia's largest trading partner, and also when it comes to the FDI, where our government is really very much focused on, China is one of the biggest as well. And on top of that, of course, we see a lot of infrastructure projects in Malaysia, not only in Kuala Lumpur, but also cutting across the different states in Malaysia, such as Johor, Kuantan, and many others as well.
So I'm quite curious about one thing. Looking at the official statistics, so this is from the Malaysian Statistics Department, the FDI from the PRC is actually not the largest, right? So there's a big component from Hong Kong, but Singapore is in the lead, and Japan's third. And if you look at stocks, the US actually has far more stock of investment in Malaysia than the PRC. Where does this sort of image that the PRC is so crucial to investment come from?
So, Ian, one thing that's very interesting about American investment in Malaysia, it is that it is underestimated by almost everyone, including the official statistics. So what happens is that when American companies invest in Malaysia, they're not investing from a company that is incorporated in Delaware and invest straight into Malaysia. Most of the time, they invest in Singapore, they establish a subsidiary, and then from that subsidiary will invest in Malaysia. In official statistics, that counts as Singapore investment. They also, because of tax reason, will invest from strange places like Ireland. So yes, American investment is not only huge, it's not only long-standing, but it is definitely underestimated. You know, um, the reason why Penang, up north, the island of Penang, is what it is because of American investment. In 1972, Intel established its first ever overseas production facility outside of United States in Penang, in Malaysia. And it's, you know, and not many people remember that actually. Partly it's because I guess American companies don't go around waving their flag, right? Intel doesn't advertise itself and probably does not wish to advertise itself as an American company, whereas the Chinese companies maybe are a bit more willing to put a PRC flag while they are constructing a major tower in the middle of Kuala Lumpur. It's very obvious to everyone where the company is from.
So how does the perception of the importance of PRC investment and trade affect, policies and also public perception?
From the media itself, there's a lot more media reporting on the China's investment compared to other countries because there's this very big political narratives playing that it often show to us that it seems like China is everywhere. And this is not just in Malaysia context, but it is real in all of the most of the Southeast Asian countries and beyond the region. I think the Chinese, they have a different ways of making their presence in another countries. While it might not be through the company just like the other countries, but it gets into like small enterprises. For instance, the restaurants. That is something that extremely significant actually. If you go to Kuala Lumpur in Petaling Street and everywhere, and as a foreigner, you might not know that this is either the Malaysian Chinese food or the Chinese from China because you can't tell anymore because they're quite dominant.
For listeners, they might also not be as familiar with Malaysia. There's the peninsular part of Malaysia, which both of you have been describing so far, and the Sabah and Sarawak, which is on northern Borneo. How would you characterize the PRC's economic presence in northern Borneo, in Sabah and Sarawak?
Not terribly significant, but growing. Simply because I think the state governments in Sabah and Sarawak are trying very hard to attract Chinese investments. Sabah is a very popular location for Chinese tourists. There are actually a lot of direct flights from sometimes pretty random places in China, going straight to Kota Kinabalu, which is the capital of Sabah. Sabah essentially offers a lot for nature lovers. If you want to, go to the beach, you want to climb a mountain, it has everything to offer.
What strikes me was during my last visit to China in Beijing, my Chinese colleagues actually was asking me about the tourism in Malaysia, and in fact, they mentioned Sabah and Sarawak first before Kuala Lumpur, and I find it interesting, and I found out that the return flight from Beijing to Kuala Lumpur, when I look at the brochure, they actually portray Sabah and Sarawak as the main tourism kind of one of it because of the nature and many other things. So I think that is something that also very interesting to look at because my Chinese colleague was saying that perhaps we should do a research project in looking at why North Borneo becomes one of the top tourism attentions when it comes to people from China.
I guess Malaysia has made it a big point to attract tourism from China. So how do you see that playing out in the Malaysian economy?
We really expose our tourism industry to Chinese tourists in a way that really hit us hard during COVID. When that happened, my goodness, basically the hotel industry was on its knees because we were so dependent on Chinese tourists. And they've come back, and it's a matter of great relief that they've come back. It's essentially, a lot of hotels, everything from the most expensive one, the most luxurious ones, the most to 3-star hotels. They really depend on Chinese tourists. But I haven't seen much backlash when it comes to tourists from China, in ways that I've heard happening in other countries, even in other parts of South Asia. There was a bit of backlash, but maybe I haven't been paying attention.
I think the business people will be very worried if the Chinese do not travel to Malaysia. And I think the recent announcements of the extension of the 5 years of the free visa will certainly accelerate the tourism of the both sides as well. And I must say that with this kind of extension, it opens up the door, of course, for Chinese to come to Malaysia more easily. But at the same time, I think it's not just the tourism, but also education as well. And I must say, within these two industry, the stakeholders have a lot of concerns if the door is to be closed one day, because they are really the main source of income coming from the Malaysians' perspective.
Right. So how about the trade bit, right? The PRC is Malaysia's largest trading partner in goods, which is the case for all Southeast Asian states. Although Southeast Asian states trade more with each other. What does Malaysia buy and sell with China?
I think in a way our economy is quite heavily export driven as well. So I think mainly coming from Malaysia, it will be, I guess, the palm oil, palm based kind of products, rubber products including as well. But coming from the China, I think that, electrical and electronics probably is both way at the same times. And of course, I think one of the things that make to the top attention is the durian from Malaysia to China, certainly in the visit of Xi Jinping. And I would think that also includes petroleums and so forth coming from Malaysia.
For at least the last 20 years, we've become very closely integrated with China's sort of like supply chain. We've become part of the sort of like same production network basically with China. So a lot of parts are made in Malaysia, subsequently shipped off to China, and which gets assembled. And guess what? It gets re-exported again. Goes to America, goes to Europe, right? So ultimate destination, not necessarily China, but yeah, China is very important part of that node, basically.
Xi Jinping visited Malaysia not too long ago, and there was a slew of memoranda of understanding signed. What does this actually bring in practicality, right? What does it change?
What makes the headlines are 31 MOUs, which I think the Malaysian government is still trying to refine and retune some of it. And the Malaysian government has announced that they will establish some sort like a consultative council to actually ensure the implementations of all those MOUs. But beyond those MOUs, I believe if you look at all the details of the deals that have been signed, some are already happenings, and it has been there for quite a while. But just that there's a ceremonial kind of deal that being made during Xi's visit to Malaysia. While I will certainly think that coming from the education sector, there certainly be some big move. For example, my own university, Malaya, is going to establish a campus in China. So that is something that is very interesting. And also, I think in Malaysia, we also have a center on the ASEAN Institute or something related to shared future, the vision by Xi Jinping that is based in Utah.
Yeah, Utah is one of the universities in Malaysia.
This trip, at least some in government see it as a makeup visit. What happened was we had our 50th anniversary, 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Malaysia and China in 2024. So Malaysia likes to see itself as a pioneer of sorts among the non-socialist countries in Southeast Asia. What happened last year was Li Qiang came, not Xi Jinping. And that made some people in this country a bit somewhat disappointed. And they've been pushing for a Xi visit ever since. So this is a makeup visit. It's not meant to break new ground as much as to be that. We've just had a visit by the premier about 12 months ago. A lot of the low-hanging stuff has already been, taken up by that visit. The 31 MOUs sounds like a big number, but you can always sign MOUs, can't you? Yeah, something that has attracted attention apart from the MOUs is this 2+2 mechanism that Malaysia has agreed with. So 2+2 means uh, meeting between the foreign ministries and the defense ministries of both sides. We have not actually determined, I mean, at least publicly, no one's mentioned what level, whether it's ministerial level or DG level. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the level is. But that has attracted a bit of attention because it sounds very strategic, doesn't it? Apart from that, I think people are asking, what exactly did we get out of it? And I think that's the wrong question, simply because of the nature of this visit. It's a political statement rather than an economic sort of like payoff time. You know, a friend of mine was saying, "Oh, why didn't we get a soft loan to build a high-speed railway?" And I think, well, you're not going to get that anymore from China. China is not in a position to give out stuff like that anymore. Maybe 10 years ago when Xi Jinping visited, no, more than 10 years ago actually, 2013, maybe China was then a bit more flush with resources to give away, throw you a nice bone here and there. But I don't think China is quite, able to do that again this time around.
Want more on China's economic trajectory? China's Reform Imperative examines China's economic reforms and their impacts on the global economy. Curated by Carnegie China Senior Fellow Michael Pettis, China's Reform Imperative will focus on China's reform progress and on the challenges and opportunities Beijing faces along the way. Go to carnegieendowment.org/China-reform-imperative for more information.
Right, so I think this gives us a nice way to then pivot to the other side of the relationship. There are as well security concerns, right? There's the issue of disputes over the South China Sea, which, Shahriman, you're an expert on. But also, there have been reported concerns about the PRC buying into media in Malaysia, getting involved in some of the local politicking and even election and campaigning. How do you see the sort of security aspect of the China-Malaysia relationship?
So the security side of the relationship, people who look at the disputes tend to overestimate the impact they have on the thinking of the decision makers in the country. Ian, you and I have been in all these Track-Two conferences on South China Sea disputes and so forth, and it really seems like a huge thing. It ought to occupy a bigger part of the mind share of everyone. You would think, right, from our discussions. But and maybe Ian Hooi has a different experience, but from my experience, when I interact with politicians, with business leaders, it is not at the forefront of their minds. It's as if it's happening elsewhere. There may be a Coast Guard ship, Chinese Coast Guard ship, always lingering around in our bit of the South China Sea near Luconia Shoals. But if you talk to people who make the real decisions in the country, and not people who claim to be making the decisions in this country, but actually making the decisions in this country, you would think that they have very little concern about those things. And you're right, Ian. There are elements that are quite concerning. The purchase of media companies, the donations to Chinese language schools in Malaysia, the cultivation of the overseas Chinese community in Malaysia, something that they promised not to do again when we established relations in 1974, something perhaps they've forgotten. That sort of stuff. You expect a bit of alarm, but no, it's almost as if, well, yeah, so what? We're doing great business with them. Let's not jeopardize that.
Well, I think when people talk about the security issues between Malaysia and China, a lot of attention are put on the South China Sea. But I think there's also the non-traditional security threats and concern as well. such as what you have earlier mentioned. Perhaps some of them are disinformation campaigns, the media campaigns, and many others. At the same time, also, I think there's also questions about the Confucius Institute, not only in Malaysia, but around the world. So I think those are the things that certainly require a little bit more investigations and concerns. And I think in the recently, what makes to the top attention of the news is the scam operation as well. So I think that organized crime within the scams and things are actually very huge in Malaysia that involve the Chinese nationals. And I think this is a very delicate issues that the Malaysian governments are gonna try to manage in terms of involving the relationship with China as well and in the both countries. So I think Putrajaya at the same time also has this approach of strategic silence. So they obviously are very reluctant to confront Beijing publicly. So you can really see this very soft kind of balancing. So they might be opt for quiet diplomacies, and the scam operation is huge in the region, and it is something that we cannot ignore. Yeah.
So I just want to follow up on something. So you describe Putrajaya's approach as strategic silence. Some might say it is just silence. Some might say it's cowering. Some might say that is, just essentially giving in. Why do you use strategic silence? What's the strategy here?
Yeah, well, I think Malaysian government has always been, well, now people will say that Malaysia's approach is very much inclined toward China. But I don't think Malaysia wants to burn that bridge of their relationship with the US as well. And I think this is quite significant if you see Tengku Zafro's delegations to US now. Of the trade delegations, his speech was basically still very much indicate that they want to maintain the relationship with the US as well. So I think with either side, Putrajaya do not normally confront either of them publicly, except on certain issues that they have been very clearly voicing out, such as the Palestinian issues or occasionally on the South China Sea issues with China.
Shahriman?
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the calculation is that being effusive, being complimentary to China works, and being critical to China invites punitive measures. It is a calculation that actually sounds a bit like Trump these days, right? But you see that's the thing, right? China responds appears to respond to that sort of thing. The cost of doing so is not terribly high. The cost of doing so with some other countries, including America, is extremely high. Simply because, imagine if my Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim were to be effusive about the United States today. He would come under a tremendous amount of pressure simply because people say, how can you do this? This is the country that has stood by Israel. As background, basically, Malaysia has a very big Muslim majority population that sees the Middle East in very, somewhat black and white terms even, right? And so if he were to sing praises on the United States, that comes at a cost. But the China relationship, for despite the South China Sea, despite the alleged interference with overseas Chinese, it's an easier sell right now to the public.
We've been sort of dancing around the Trump administration and its trade war with China. Of course, that changes things quite a bit. You mentioned earlier, Shahriman, that a lot of products that Malaysia sells to the PRC gets assembled there and then sold on to the US as a final market. Similarly, a lot of the imports that Malaysia buys from the PRC gets assembled and sent off to the US and among other markets. Now, as the US market is more closed off, and of course, they've put tariffs on Malaysia as well. And Malaysia had been a big beneficiary of that China plus one model that had come in the first phase of the trade war. So this really upends that whole system, that whole ecosystem. So how does Malaysia then try to navigate its relationship with the PRC given these new circumstances?
Penang in 2023 got more investment than the previous 11 or 12 years combined, according to the Financial Times. The Financial Times did this fantastic coverage of how Malaysia was actually the surprising winner from the trade war, essentially. So all these companies were suddenly opening up shop in Penang, trying to open companies that would essentially, circumvent the trade restrictions imposed by the United States. And yes, huge winner of the trade war until now, of course. But at the same time, I think the calculation is still that yes, Trump will impose trade restrictions, but right now, 24% where we are is gives us a bit of a slight advantage over some of our neighbors. Yeah, but Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, they are hit with much bigger, much higher tariffs than Malaysia. So the calculation is that yes, things are bad, but Malaysia might still have a bit of a comparative advantage. Whether that actually continues to work, I'm not sure.
Before Trump imposed the tariffs to Malaysia and the other countries, um, Malaysia under Anwar Ibrahim has already taken several approaches in terms of foreseeing the unpredictable geopolitical tensions that we might face. Hence, you can see that the economic diversification that actually happens, and also Malaysia's intention to join BRICS as well. So I think those approaches and steps have already been taken before Trump's impositions of the tariffs. And I believe the Malaysian government will continue to do so. And more so, Malaysia is not alone in this tariff war being imposed.
So you've talked about diversification. Certainly, Malaysia has looked at that quite a bit. It's looked quite a lot at the Chinese market. But we also know that once this sort of end market in the US has become more closed off, the Chinese market itself, right, is now experiencing low consumption. It might not be able to buy as much as other economies have been hoping. It may not, be that promised huge market of 1.4 billion people. They may have less money to spend, or perhaps less willing to spend that money. And at the same time, we see in the PRC, as Shahriman had mentioned earlier too, they're not as flush with cash to be able to do the kinds of investment that had gone before. And with this, what we saw a little bit with the first round of the trade war, and we're probably going to see again, is this question of overcapacity as the PRC diverts its own trade away from the US into other markets. A lot of its goods are coming to Southeast Asia, including places like Malaysia, and there are complaints too that the cheaper PRC goods are driving local businesses essentially out of the market, or at least creating a lot of pressure for them. How does Malaysia as a country, and also how does the Malaysian government look at this set of complications?
Well, just couple months ago, and also recently, the economy minister Rafizi Ramli was proposing something about it is time to support local products, and he was promoting that it should be a made by Malaysia's visions. But I think in terms of this, in Malaysia capacity to face the trade wars, is that it kind of sends us a signals that all of this sort of focusing on our local products, focusing on the local entrepreneurs has always been there, but have not been paid much of the attention until this sort of trade war is actually happening. So on the brighter side, of course, there's been more focus in terms of the local products, but I believe in these few years. But we also have to bear in mind that the Trump's administration is very much unpredictable. So we wouldn't know what will really happen next. He seems to be changing his tone quite a bit. But I think he is also at the same time trying to buying in the support from all these countries, including Malaysia as well. Basically, you can see that the main enemies is really China, apart from his America First campaign. So I think we will be yet to see what's going to happen in the long run.
You've seen Malaysia impose anti-dumping measures on Chinese steel wires in February, I think. Sorry, January was steel wires. February was plastics, but that was also aimed at Indonesia. So you're going to see more and more of those kinds of measures. Of course, there is a limit to how much you can do that and still contend with the huge influx of cheap Chinese imports. I mean, the stuff that you can buy from e-platforms like Shopee, for example. It's just incredible how cheap things are. I can't believe how anything can be made so cheaply. I mean, it's going to be a problem. It's going to affect Malaysia in a way that is going to hurt us. I don't think government has a ready answer to it. The Malaysian economy is essentially 95% SME, small and medium enterprises, and if they suffer, then the rest of us will do too. Um, I I also think that the allure of the Chinese market is still there. It's slowing down, but people still talk about it as if it's the next big thing. I guess it's partly because they are so well plugged into the Chinese market. I guess because maybe the ethnic Chinese business community in Malaysia, because for sheer reason of language, maybe they can deal with Chinese businesses. I don't know.
I'm going to ask you both to look beyond the horizon a little bit. Share with our audience what you think are the challenges and prospects you expect Malaysia to face in its relationship with the PRC going forward, especially in this increasingly uncertain time, and also at a time when your government, of course, current government, is trying to seek re-election.
I mean, that's a really important thing to point out to your listeners, basically. Ian. This government has to go to elections 2027. End of 2027. We'll probably go to elections 2026. Tendency to go around the fourth year mark. And so Malaysia has this strange balancing act to play. And one of the things that maybe people ought to look at how my prime minister tries to be very complimentary towards China, including in his speeches and so on and so forth, and yet try not to look too captive to China. We are seeing how even the Europeans are being pressured to choose right now. About how they are expected to somewhat limit their exposure to China in exchange for smooth trade relations with the United States. I expect that will come too. Balancing between America and China. Let me just say this: there is no plan B to America. Whatever I say about China, about it looming large over everyone, and but ultimately there is no substitute for the American market, and no one with their right mind, no one in their right minds would say there is a substitute to American market. The Malaysian semiconductor industry, 25% of all chips that go to America actually flows through Malaysia at some point. 80% of catheters, medical devices, catheters are made in Malaysia. Those are made by companies that sell to America a lot. Pacemakers, 200 medical device companies are in Malaysia, and a lot of them find their headquarters not in Hangzhou or Beijing. They find them in Boston.
One of the things that we have that Malaysia talks about a lot is that it doesn't want to choose. It wants to have good relations with both Washington and Beijing, as Shahriman had laid out. But that seems increasingly challenging, right? So how do you see the Malaysian government trying to navigate its way through going forward?
I certainly see Malaysia's China strategy has evolved in a way to some form of pragmatism. But I personally would think that there should be principal pragmatism. But what we are seeing is they are accommodating somehow to the Chinese demands and so forth. But having said that, I think our governments faces several structural challenges some have been mentioned by Shahriman, but I think the geopolitical volatility here can also force Malaysia into a more explicit positioning in some cases in the future. Despite of course, everyone was saying that Malaysia is doing the hedging. And the second thing is the domestic political legitimacy, because with the significant presence of the Chinese narratives, and earlier on we're discussing about Malaysia's gearing up to the next elections. I think there's you would certainly notice that anything related to China has become very sensitive in the media, and it always being reported, and there's a lot of narratives are being portrayed, and that you can see some kind of politicizations of the foreign policy into the domestic debates. So it is rather unhealthy, and I don't think Malaysian government has been able to actually manage that kind of debates on the ground. And the third thing, of course, Malaysia as the ASEAN chair this year is extremely important, looking at the how they can be differing national responses to China, starting from the terrorist war, and also, of course, the issues of South China Seas and Myanmar itself.
So just very briefly, when you said principle pragmatism, what are the principles at stake here?
Well, I think there are, of course, certain issues that the Malaysia should not bow down. For me, coming from the background of human rights and democracy, that is something that I always hope Malaysian governments can be more vocal on, and also by being a ASEAN chair. So I think there are, of course, issues that I think Malaysia is practicing anchor into these notions of sovereignty itself. But what I would like to highlight in the principle pragmatism is that I think cautiousness should always be applied in this case, and case by case basis.
I'm going to say something that's going to annoy you, I think, a bit, and annoy a lot of people. I think one of those things that Malaysia ought to do, which may sound like a major compromise, and I think it's time to do it, is joint development in the South China Sea. 100% of nothing is nothing. A fraction of something, which means jointly developing areas that are not accessible to us now because we are being kept out of it because of Chinese pressure. At a time when oil and gas is not only riding out of fashion, but also becoming less relevant because of the energy transition, we are risking allowing all that oil and gas go to waste. I do not want to wake up in 20 years, 30 years hence and find that the world has moved on to, renewables, to nuclear, and all that stuff we didn't dig out from the South China Sea is now useless. Why? Because we waited too long to do this. We need to do it before Malaysia grows old. Malaysia grows old at 2040. Doesn't mean that the lights shut and the curtains go down on the 1st of January 2040. No. But growth becomes harder and harder after that, because over 14% of our population will be above the age of 64. It is better to get rich before you get old. We need to maximize whatever we can get out of the oil and gas in the South China Sea. I'm sorry, Ian. I've resisted this almost my entire career, but I think it's time. I think because our other big friend, it's not so predictable anymore. I think it's time.
Thank you so much, Shahriman and Ying Hooi. It was really great to have you both on. Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to the China and the World podcast, a production of Carnegie China, the East Asia-based center of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Views expressed are those of the host and guest panelists, and not necessarily those of Carnegie China or the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Subscribe to the China and the World podcast on popular podcast platforms such as iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more about Carnegie China at carnegiechina.org. Tim Martin is our audio engineer and producer, with help from Heewon Park and Wan Yi Du.